Okay, so hello everybody. It is February 13th and 7 o'clock, and this is our class for 1, 2, 3, 4, our fifth class here in the web programming class. There are people that might be here also for the HTML5 class. I don't see anybody here in the class, but or online, but they could be watching. So it's the fourth week for you because you had a holiday in there, luckily. So anyway, but again this week, like last week, the curriculum kind of merged. So we have guests in this class, and for that class you have a recorded video. So and then next week I think we'll diverge somewhat again. So the HTML5 class is always invited here, but the topic will probably be off topic to you for the most part. So let's see what we're going to cover this week. So last week we started to talk about responsive web design. We talked about what that means. Some of the basis of it comes from CS53, and we implemented a responsively laid out page using a framework called Bootstrap, which was developed by Twitter. Today we're going to continue along that path and create probably a more elaborate and sophisticated page layout using Bootstrap again, and adding some of the more sophisticated components in Bootstrap. And then we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about JavaScript. So JavaScript is a computer programming language that's built into web design. It's run in the browser, and it's important for web designers at every level. Number one. Number two is it's important to the curriculum of both of these classes. Maybe in slightly different ways, but it's important to the curriculum for both of these classes. Number one. Number two is a class in JavaScript is not a requirement for this class. It's not a prerequisite. So today we're going to kind of take JavaScript at a very high level and see how to really, get JavaScript on a page and how to use it, as opposed to maybe write JavaScript programs from scratch. And as we go forward in each of these classes, you'll each use JavaScript possibly in slightly different ways. The HTML5 class will use it more in client-side programming. The web programming class, this class, will use JavaScript as a way to interact with PHP servers for data, because we're learning about how to build database-driven websites, and JavaScript is typically the catcher of that data in the browser and the organizer of it in the browser. So we'll talk about JavaScript today, and then we're going to talk about a special HTML5 new element called Canvas. So this is probably more applicable to the HTML5 class because it's their curriculum for this week. If we look over at their class website, you'll see that this week is, or I didn't advance it, but this week is Canvas week. So if you're more interested in Canvas, if you're in the web programming class and you really want to dig deeper into Canvas, feel free to click over there. We're going to do a simple tutorial that does something I think kind of cool. So Canvas is as I said, it's a new element that enables a web page to render vector elements, right? Drawing elements. And also, I believe, bitmap elements as well. But it's really focused on vector elements, and we're going to use a library that writes to Canvas that does some animation of vectors. So you'll see it's kind of a cool effect. Something I've been meaning to figure out a way to do for a while, and I finally figured it out with Canvas, and we'll play with that today. So that's kind of where we're going today. It's a tutorial that you should be able to follow along with. I've got an idea in my mind about a simple website, one-page website that I'm going to build. You could use the same content because we start out with images and they're up on the repository. I'll show you how to get them in a minute. But if you have another idea in mind, feel free to go ahead. All you have to do is start. The images and the content are neutral. What we're going to do is build a page, and you can put whatever you want in there. But some of the image sizing will, matter. So I've got some starter images for us. So, and I'll show you where to get those in a minute. So let's talk a little bit about the class in general. So, we're about almost a third of the way into the class. We should start talking about the final project. So, in both of these classes, the final project is a pretty big component of the grade. It's all the project work is in one thing, right? So my intent is to not make that a big burdensome thing and enable you, one, to apply all these exercises we do in one way or another into something you can submit as a final project, and two, to make it something you can work on throughout the semester, and three, I would like to not only offer you but encourage you to work in teams. So I think that would be useful, and I think it would be something I could sort of help nurture and encourage if I could, either through the website or whatever. Different people have different focus areas and different background skills and all that. So I think it's good. I think part of this, very few websites are built by one person. Doesn't mean you have to work in a team, but I would even go as far as to say, one, it's cool for teams to be composed of both classes because they are kind of complementary. So that would be all right if we could work that out. That's fine. And two, there are a few people, a handful, that are taking both classes. So the question is, do I do one project for both? Yeah, you do a really, really good one. So, well, we could talk about that on an individual basis. But I think there's no reason to have to do two projects if you're taking both of these classes. But I do think you could conceive of a project that incorporates a lot of what you've learned in both of these classes. So anyway, so the way I think forward for the project is I am going to start thinking of some examples that I could just put out there. But like I said before, I'm okay if you're working on something and want to use that, number one, or if you have an idea and you want to run with that, number two. So in fact, I'd even prefer it if you came to me and said, I'd like to work on this, or we'd like to work on this. So anyway, doesn't have to include 15 lessons, everything you've learned in everything, but it certainly should probably include a demonstration of most of the techniques that we're going to learn in each of these classes. Right, so for this class, it would have to be a database-driven website in some way or another. So some of the content would have to be in a database. Some of the content, the access to that content would have to be done in PHP. And the way you get it from the web page to PHP would have to be done using the techniques that we're going to learn in this class. So as I said, and as we saw in some articles that I posted, 90% of websites are database driven. You don't have to build the next Amazon.com, but it would be very simple to build something that is a boiled down version of that. Maybe a storefront that doesn't have maybe the credit card processing, but has the ability to add products and present them in some way. That would be a killer, that'd be a killer project. And design the front end of it using some of the techniques we're going to learn. So, but yeah, for this class, it would have to incorporate data coming from a database and being presented, from a PHP server process to a JavaScript client process, and then present them on the page. And if that stage right now, you're going to know how to do that somewhere about 2/3 of the way through this class. And some of you who took the JavaScript class should be somewhat familiar with some of that already, or might have learned that in a PHP class or other classes. So for the HTML5 class, we'll we'll talk about what would go into an interesting project, but it should be probably more of a web app than a website. And that's not a wall, it's sort of a DMZ, you know, in other words, it's hard to define the line of what's a web app and what's a website, but it should be something that does something. And we'll talk about that. I don't think there's anybody sitting here right now in that class. Are you in there? I think you're right. Yeah. So, any questions about the final project? Anybody out there? Cool, a couple of people. Great. I would like to develop an online appointment application. That would be killer. That would be something that would be a lot of fun. Yeah. So typically in a lot of my classes I'll introduce, and one of the things about PHP that's kind of interesting is, and JavaScript, if you're in the HTML5 classes, the ability to access third-party data, not on your site, but on another site. We talked about PHP being great at getting data from a database that you own and created, but it could also go out and get into the biggest database in the world, which is Facebook, I guess now. I don't know. Maybe it's not yet. It's probably bigger than Amazon. Because, you know, people post up there, and it's got like 1 billion users. But anyway, speculate. So that sounds like a perfect, Joe, that sounds like a perfect example. One of the examples is the application I showed you on what we built last year in this class, where we all kind of worked on it together week by week in a tutorial, that newsletter subscription system. So that would be something like that, where you're entering data in a database and it's doing something. You know, there you're entering subscribers and newsletters, and you're emailing newsletters to the subscribers. So it's not magic, it's not inventing something that's patentable, but it's doing something that will take some techniques to build out and will teach you skills that will really build your web development skills. At the end of that, you'll be able to say, I built a working web application. Okay? So, final project. I'd like to learn how to tie galleries from Flickr or Facebook into anything. So that would also be a good example also. I'm sure Flickr has PHP APIs. I know they have JavaScript APIs, and that would be something like that would be interesting. So let's see. So what are we going to learn this week? So I'll probably talk a little bit, and then we'll start doing stuff. Does that make sense? Because some of this is conceptual. How many people have not ever worked with JavaScript at all? Yeah, so it's more than half of the class. And I'm looking at the people online. Some of them are in my Java, 1 or 2. So we're going to start out with JavaScript because I don't think it's an overstatement to say that you got to know JavaScript. And there's different levels of knowing JavaScript, just like there's different levels of knowing anything. And a web designer doesn't necessarily have to be a JavaScript super expert, but even somebody who considers himself a designer, and even somebody who doesn't even code in HTML but uses Dreamweaver or something like that, should be somewhat familiar with JavaScript because it's what makes things happen on a web page. It's a programming language that runs in the browser and can find and manipulate the elements of your web page. That's essentially what JavaScript is. Okay. So, and if we go to this kind of schizophrenic here. If we go to the web programming classes website and go to the February 13th week lesson, which might not be the default right now. I have to up it maybe. It is. Good. And remember to do that. You'll see that little blog here kind of explains to some degree what we're going to do, what we're going to talk about, and then there's a bunch of links. So this is not, this page is not replicated on the HTML5 page, and if you're in that class, link over to the web programming class to look at this page if you're following along with this. It's not a requirement. If you're not following along, you're not listening, so I don't need to talk to you. But if you're following along now and you don't want to listen for the next 3 hours, you could go back and just read about Canvas and not follow along with this lecture, because you got to, that is part of your curriculum, and there's a lot of work to be done there. This is only going to be about 20% about Canvas, but also dovetails into what you should be learning. So anyway, all the links are basically right here on everything we're going to learn. And you could skip forward. I'm not going to do that now because we're going to go through it throughout the day. Somebody had a question before we even get started. We're going to start with this JavaScript. And for tutorial, if you people in this class, it's not a bad idea for this to be this week's reading. It's free. It's a great tutorial. And if you took the JavaScript class last year, it's probably review. And if it's boring, you don't have to take it again. But for people who are new to JavaScript, it's not a bad introduction to JavaScript. We're going to start to go through that in a minute. But before we get into the deep stuff, let's look at some of the stuff I put on here is just like news or information. And one thing that's applicable to this class is all the new tools that Adobe is releasing. Well, two things. One, all the tools that Adobe is releasing under the brand name Edge, the Adobe Edge Tool Suite. And all of these are available, as far as I know, for free. They require an Adobe, what are the subscriptions called? The cloud, Creative Cloud. So they require a Creative Cloud subscription, but a free one is fine. You can sign up for Creative Cloud without paying, and you can get to these Edge tools. I don't know. I did it today. Yeah, just for cloud, and then you get to these tools, and then you can download any of these tools. And they're more cloud-based tools than the traditional Creative Suite tools. In other words, and one of these is like a code, a code editor, sort of like Dreamweaver, except it's really lightweight, it's free. It isn't Dreamweaver, it doesn't have all the sites and all of that. In fact, I downloaded it today and played with it, and it doesn't really do a lot, but it's worth exploring. There are, some of these other tools are pretty cool. So one of the things that brought me here is that Adobe announced this product today, Adobe Edge Reflow. And it's kind of this tool to see how your website would look, your responsively laid out website would look on different screen sizes. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. For me, it seems like a cool tool, but all I have to do is go like this, So, maybe it has more information. I played around with it a little. So these tools are kind of cool, and it shows Adobe's direction in moving towards cloud-based tools. But they're not up to quite where Dreamweaver is yet, as far as I can tell. So that's one side of the Adobe piece. The other side is what Carlene brought up before, or somebody did, which is the Creative Cloud accounts for the traditional products is $20 a month for students and faculty. And it's available just for a short time, I think. And do you have to get it online or at the store? Has anyone bought it? Carlene, you bought it today?
Yeah.
At the store or online?
Online. But the cool thing is, you license two copies of
Right.
You can have both the Microsoft and
Oh, so it's not platform specific. Yeah. So so you go online and you just tell them you're a student.
You tell your students, you give them the college and all that.
Okay. Yeah.
Then you download whatever you want and follow up there.
Yeah, so if you've already bought the Creative Cloud, I don't know how the subscriptions work, but if you don't have a subscription, a new offer just came out this week for $20 a month, where before it was $30 a month. So Adobe is lowering their prices pretty aggressively. They're under they're under investigation among a couple of other companies in Australia for their high cost of their products. So they immediately lowered their prices in Australia, and then I think they responded somewhat around the world. So, so two announcements. One, the traditional products like Dreamweaver are 33% off at this point, at least for the first year of your subscription. Number one. Number two is the subscription is just like the other Creative Suite products. You're allowed to have two simultaneous copies, but on the cloud you can have them across different versions. You don't buy the version for Mac or for Windows. You just buy it and you can run them on two different platforms, which could be pretty cool for some people who need to test things on different platforms. So, and then, like I said, the other part was this Edge stuff. So I'll continue to track this, and maybe towards the second half of the semester we'll do a class or a part of a class and go through these tools in a little depth. I didn't have a chance to go in too deeply before today, but it is a good step in the right direction, I think, for Adobe and for us. We're getting good products cheaper. There are other online development environments. We looked at one last week called Codica, if you're in this class. We looked at the jQuery mobile drag and drop HTML editor, if you're in this class. There's another one that I've seen people use called Cloud9. And I think it's C9IO or something like that. Cloud9 IDE. And here you just get an account and you're really on the cloud. Like there's no software that gets installed on your computer. Your files are in the cloud. Your development is running in the cloud or within a browser. I think it's all free for individual developers or at least students taking a class like this. And it's integrated tightly with GitHub. So if you don't hate GitHub yet in this class, no, you will love it because you don't even have to touch GitHub. And it's literally you save your file and it puts it into GitHub. Or, there's another step. But, where you go file save, you go file commit, and it does your GitHub. And so it's integrated. And I think for people who use GitHub, this is something you might want to look into. This is a Dreamweaver class, so I'm not trying to get you to deinstall Dreamweaver, but it is interesting to look at the alternatives. And this is a free, 100% online alternative, and I know a person who spends, I think pretty much full-time development who's using this pretty much full-time just over the last couple of weeks. It's easy to learn, and it's free. I have not personally used it. Yeah. Maybe we'll take a look at this in a future class when we look at those other tools. So a little bit of the talk about Adobe. Let's go back to our curriculum here. So we're going to learn a little bit about this thing called Paper.js, which is something to program Canvas on. So we're not going to get into that right now. We'll probably talk about it in the next hour and a half or so. There was some talk on the discussion. I think it was more on the discussion board for the HTML5 class than this class about CSS3 transitions. And a couple of people couldn't get them to work. Noah, the TA, posted an example of how to use them in a very simple sense. And these were a couple of articles on more sophisticated usage of CSS3 transitions. So this one is pretty interesting. This is a pure CSS3 slideshow with no JavaScript. So the whole thing is programmed in CSS. And let's see if it works somewhere in here. There's more comments to the article than the article. Is there a demo? Check out the demo. Yeah, so this slideshow, which has a timer, which has basically an auto forward slide with some nice effects and a hover over with a caption there's no JavaScript in this. It's all CSS. And this tutorial takes you step by step in how to do that. We're not going to do this today, but if you're interested in learning how this can be done, now it's not, there are drawbacks to this. Does anyone see any drawbacks? Yeah, so, well, okay, so, right. One concept of this is that the images are on the page all at once, so there's no, number one, there's no pre-caching of the next image necessarily, or two, there's no non-caching. You know, everything is loaded at the front end. But one thing that's even more apparent, I mean, you could get some interactivity. Did you see that load and it had a little, you see that it has a little progress bar at the bottom there? What it doesn't have is any controls, like next, previous, because those take some JavaScript to do some, you know, that requires some interactivity. That requires an event. We'll learn a little bit maybe today about what an event is. But what CSS3 does introduce is the concept of what's called keyframes, which help with the concept of time. You know, because what this means is obviously the transitions hold the period of time, but keyframes kind of keep track of what happens in the beginning of time, what happens at the end of that time, right? So, and like I said, if you go through this tutorial step by step, if you're interested in this, it's a pretty good and interesting tutorial. Probably more applicable to the HTML5 class than this class, but I am non-discriminatory. So that's an interesting link. The other link, if you're interested in getting deeper into slideshows using JavaScript, this is a tutorial that we built in the JavaScript class in the fall. Some of you are in that class. And what it shows is that it's not really an either-or. In other words, if you go, this is also a step-by-step tutorial. And it's just something we did. It's on the Santa Rosa site. And, but if you see, most of the implementation is in CSS for the slideshow. It's just that the timing and progression is done in JavaScript. So this we did in what? Maybe the third or fourth week of the class in JavaScript. So it's probably more JavaScript than you want and need for this class. But if you're interested in it, you could go through this tutorial and see how that slideshow is made. Right? For the purposes of this, what I'm going to do today, I'm not going to do either of those. So those are, the reason I'm going through those now, those are like explore. You know, if you're interested in getting deeper, those are two tutorials. One is a slideshow based on JavaScript and CSS3. The other one is purely CSS3. I'm going to build the slideshow that we did last week, which is based on the carousel, which is built into Bootstrap, because it's so simple. And it basically does all of what we need. So I'm going to go through that again, and what we're going to do today is use that carousel template. You know, where you get that big carousel header. And we'll build a page based on that. So we'll see more of the responsive design pieces. So a little bit more about slideshows. Slideshows are, you know, I don't know. You kind of have to know how to do them. Every website has slideshows. They're good. They can be overused. You know, a lot of news sites use them where you have to go next, 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 so they get an advertisement on each one. That's the wrong way to do it. You know, they don't use JavaScript. They use next page so they could flush the ads. You know, all of these techniques that we're learning are the right way to build a slideshow, right? Not the spammy way, but a way to present images on a site that is modern and interactive and easy on the eye. Remember, 5 years ago, websites had pages that had images, a table of images, and nobody wants to see that anymore. The images are too small, and they're, so you kind of have to know how to build a slideshow these days. And what we're going to do today is build a slideshow so that it is the website, that really is the compelling visual feature of the site. So, but enough about slideshows for now. Let's talk a little bit about, there's one more link on here if you're interested. There's nothing to do with the tutorial. The elements of typography for the web. So I'm going to go to that now. And this is a pretty interesting statement this guy makes. Web design is 95% typography. So does anyone know what typography is? Yeah, so one of the answers is the design of the typeface you're using. And that's a typical answer, and that's what I would have said maybe before I read this article. But it's all of that. So this article will say, choosing the font is a small part of it. It's a lot of stuff. It's margins, it's leading, it's all of this stuff. Again, this is totally, it's not off topic or tangential, but it's, it's just one of these things that I bring up because it's important to this class, but it's not required. It's not going to be on the midterm or anything. But anyway, from here, I couldn't link to it directly because of the way this page is set up, but I followed to this link, Web Typography, which brings you to a whole book called The Elements of Typographic Style Applied to the Web. And if you look at the table of contents, it really goes through a step-by-step exploration of what you should think of when you design a site in terms of typography. And you'll see that the guy is right. Choosing the font is not number one. There's a lot of things to think about, and each of these actually goes to very specific CSS rules you can use to enable these unwritten rules. What do they call? Elements of style. So not everybody here is, or in either of these classes, is a designer by nature, but everybody who works on a website should be able to, say that type doesn't work here or something. So it's just another resource to look at. Again, explore. It's not required. It's not going to be on the final midterm or anything like that. But if you're interested, there's a lot of great information on this site. It's a little tricky to get to because I couldn't link directly to this page. If you look at, when you type this address in, it takes you here because it's kind of iframed in some way. So what you do is when you get there, you go to this web typography and click there. Some of these other links are also pretty good. This guy is he designs the New York Times. So this is just his blog, but he has I've read some of these articles. He's a pretty interesting guy. So anyway, enough about typography. There is a class at the JC in typography, and it does apply to web designers. And there is also a class, I believe, in page layout. I forget what it's called. It's not called page layout, but it's in the graphic design department, I believe. Okay, any questions about any of this? The science of text screen design, exactly. Style of font faces. So like I said, that's a part of it, Nick. In fact, this article says you got to work with the fonts that are available to you. Typography is how do you work with those fonts. So it's a little bit more design than I'm not sure what that means, but if you're interested, read the article. So JavaScript. So let's talk about JavaScript. So I'm going to click over to this tutorial for now. And before we get, so this tutorial, I love W3 Schools because it's a pretty good resource as a reference, but they also have very good step-by-step tutorials. So if you follow these, essentially these steps, you'll get a pretty good overview of the components of JavaScript, okay? There are other tutorials for JavaScript. Like I said, JavaScript is an interesting thing. It's very important to both of these classes, and we're going to use it in both of these classes, but we don't have a lot of time to teach it in both of these classes. So I'm going to teach you enough as we go along to do what we need to do. And if some people might get frustrated by that. How do you do that? What does that mean? What's a variable? Here, you can go to some of these tutorials and learn some of this stuff. So this is a pretty good tutorial. Another one that I didn't link from our page is called codeacademy.com. They are down. So good thing I didn't link to it. But this codeacademy.com has tutorials for many different types of programming type of subjects. And it started out with JavaScript. And not only is it a tutorial, but it actually has a pretty cool workspace where you can type JavaScript in and it does what it's supposed to. Right? So I will link to that. It looks like it's down for maintenance now. Which is good to see that sites come down every once in a while. So what's cool about this is it also has a little bit of a working sort of playground, right, where you could see code and then see what it does, right? So let's explore this. This is like the first step in the example. And this is very similar to the first step that we did in this class using PHP. In this case, we're using JavaScript. There are big differences, but we're kind of doing the same thing. We display a date. It's like the first thing we did, remember? Before we figured out the difference of a date and an age and all that, we displayed a date. So we clicked the button in this case and displayed the date, which is cooler than what we did in PHP. We loaded the page and the date showed up. Right? So how did we do this? First of all, JavaScript and PHP are totally unconnected on the page. So before I even get into JavaScript, one thing to wrap your minds around is that one web page can have PHP on it and can have JavaScript on it. And it could have HTML, of course, on it as well. You can have a field in HTML or a paragraph in HTML with a value in it. And you can also have a variable in PHP, as we saw, that has a value in it, right? And you can put that value from a variable onto the element of the page, or you could get the value of the element of the page and put that in PHP. You could do the same thing in JavaScript. JavaScript has variables, and you could use these variables to hold information and then get them into elements on the page as well. But JavaScript variables and PHP variables don't know about each other. Does that make sense? So HTML could sort of interact with both of those languages. And the languages, as we'll learn in a couple of weeks, can interact using other types of technologies, but their space is different. A variable in PHP is not visible in JavaScript, and a variable in JavaScript is not visible in PHP. You have to send them to each other. All right? So that might not make sense right now, but at a high level, a lot of the things that are available in PHP are available in JavaScript, but the first thing to remember is they're not the same. PHP is sitting in tags. Remember those PHP tags that we created? JavaScript is in something called a script. And a script is also enclosed within tags, but it's the different tags. There are these script tags. Script tags are HTML. PHP tags are not really HTML. You know, they have an opening caret, but they don't have a closing caret, or the closing one has a closing caret. So they're really directives on the page, right? Do you remember what I'm talking about? Do you want to go back? Well, yeah, I could go back and look at some PHP. Let's see where's a good place to.
Just if you go to W3 schools.
Oh yeah, good idea. Good idea. PHP. Which brings up another important point. You can see the JavaScript on a page by using the inspector or doing view source, but you can't see the PHP on a page because the server has processed it. So the PHP tags install syntax here. So PHP, you can see the tags here. They're not HTML tags. They are directives on the page to say this block is not HTML. It is PHP. Process it, Mr. Server, right? Whereas if we go back to the JavaScript example here, this is an HTML tag, a script tag, right? And a script sits in an element. In fact, a script is an element on your page. You could give it an ID. You could give it a class, right? You might think hard about why you'd want to do that or how you would use that capability, but it's an element on your page. In this case, it's in the head section of this document, but it could also be in the body section, okay? And it could be anywhere basically on the document. And within the script tags will always be JavaScript. Now, there are different types of scripts, but JavaScript is the universal scripting language that's available in all browsers, and it's no longer necessary to tell it what language you're using. You can just say script, and by default, it'll be JavaScript. Today, we're going to use that paper script that I showed you before for Canvas, and we'll create a slightly different script tag for that. So we'll see an example of that. But for JavaScript, all you need is a script. So all of the JavaScript code on this page is, not all of it, but the bulk of it is right here in these 4 lines. There's one other little piece of JavaScript here, and that's not sitting in a script tag, right? So one of the things you could do is insert JavaScript directly in a special type of attribute of a page element. There are attributes that are what are called event listeners. This is an on-click event listener. So when you click on this button, it does something. Do you see that? It updated the time. See the seconds? So it doesn't do that unless I click that button. Right? So this is an event listener it's saying don't do anything but at this point, but if this button is clicked, run this JavaScript. And that JavaScript is what? What is that one statement or one line there? Whether you know PHP, even from what we learned in the first 2 weeks here in this class, or you know JavaScript, or you've worked with another programming language, that is a function. 3. People at home get the point this time, not the people in class. So that is a function. More specifically, that is a function call. We're invoking the function. And up in the script area, up in the head, is where we define the function. Remember, we learned this in PHP. So there is a lot of similarity. They're both programming languages that have the concept of functions and statements and variables and assignments and conditionals. All those basic things we learn in PHP, you're going to learn again in JavaScript. In fact, you don't even have to learn them again. This is review for you. So we need to learn them again. But is this a built-in function that we're calling here?
No, you have to define your function.
We had to define the function. And exactly. It's a built-in event listener. Right? OnClick is built in. It came with the HTML button element. All elements on a web page have a OnClick attribute. So if you go to HTML OnClick, you'll see there's an OnClick event, and it'll explain how it's used. And this is not the best way to program an event in JavaScript, as we'll learn maybe tonight or as we go forward. But it's an easy way. You put it right in with the data element. If you wanted to do something more complex, do something before you call that function, then it gets a little tricky. How do you put a whole program in that attribute? You know what I mean? But you could put one or two statements as the text value of an OnClick attribute, and it will work, just like we're seeing in this example. So, and there's many more event listeners than OnClick. There's OnHover and on, so you can look those up. But the reason I'm showing you this is W3 Schools will teach you this. In fact, it's part of not the JavaScript tutorial, but sort of the JavaScript documentation. Sort of the glossary. So, or reference. That's what I need to say. Sorry. So we have a program here, which is basically one function. Here we're invoking or calling a function, and here we are defining the function. Just like in PHP, we start defining a function by saying the word function. And then we give it a function name. And we're going to use this name whenever we call it. And then we put those parentheses. If we have arguments, if we have, not arguments in the sense of like, the teacher won't leave the class before me. No, arguments sort of like, I want you to run, and I want you to run with this information, specifically. So that's called passing an argument. I want you to give me the date, and I want you to give me the date in this format, or this way, or this millennium, or whatever. So in this case, we have no arguments, just display the date. And this function isn't smart enough to do anything internally to deal with an argument. All it does is say this one statement. And this is kind of the guts of this program. It is the core of JavaScript. The magic of JavaScript is it knows about your web page when it's running on your web page. So what does that mean? Document is an object that is automatically loaded onto the page when there's a document loaded into a web browser. And every element is on that page is a child of this document object. The document object in JavaScript is sometimes or usually known as the DOM, or the document object model. So what we're saying here is when this page loads, look at the whole document and get a handle on any element that has an ID of demo. And this is only going to happen when we click, right? When we click, go to the document, find all, it's actually not going to find all, it's going to find the first element that has an ID of demo. That's what this function does. This is a built-in function to JavaScript. It's actually not built into JavaScript, it's built into the DOM. It comes with the document when it's loaded. It gives you a way of getting at the map of all the pieces of your page. So get a handle on that, and then find its property called inner HTML, which is another aspect of the DOM. It's not something we created. It's something that's available in the DOM. I'm going to show you that in a minute. And then what are we going to do with that? We have that. That is something. It's a holder. It's like a variable. It's an object. What does the equal sign do in this case? It's 2-0. It's the assignment operator. Remember that? It's the assignment operator. It says, take the value of whatever is to the right and take this thing that's to the left of it and give it that value. So here, the value of this evaluates to this date. The value of this whole thing evaluates to this element on the web page, which is this paragraph essentially in your HTML, which has an ID of demo. Does that make sense?
So it's replacing this as a paragraph as well.
Yeah, so if I reload this page, it'll say this is a paragraph, because that's what's in the HTML. All right? When I click on this button, this on-click event listener is going to say run display date. And display date's going to say, go find this element and this property of that element, which is the HTML that is inside the tags, which happens to be not HTML, but just pure text, right? And assign it with whatever comes back from running this function, which is a JavaScript built-in function, just like it was in PHP. It might look a little different than the PHP output, but it does the same thing. You know what I mean? I think it returns thousandths of a second, as opposed to seconds from whenever Linus Torvalds was born or whatever it is. So, but when we click on this, the page document is smart enough to say, hey, somebody programmed an event for that on-click. I got to do something. And this is what it does. It puts the date in that field. Right? So what have we learned? We've learned a couple of things. JavaScript usually goes, well, what do we learn first of all? One, JavaScript could sit on a web page right alongside the HTML5, right along the HTML elements. It just has to be within a script tag in most cases. However, in some small cases, like you could use small snippets of JavaScript in specific areas, like in the event listener attributes of elements. But in almost all cases, you're going to put it in script tags, and I would go as far as to say, in this class, we will probably never use these. They're not the most professional way of doing JavaScript. So it exists on the page, kind of like PHP, but it exists within an element on the page. The other thing about JavaScript that's very different from PHP is that the client runs it. There's nothing happening on the server. We didn't reload the page. So it's the browser that is figuring out the date. So what makes this date different than the date we looked at when we did the PHP page? Right. So if I'm in China getting onto the Santa Rosa student server and I run this program, I'm going to get a very different date. Right? Or if I change, let's do this. It says, whatever it is here, let's go, I wonder if I could just move it. Nope. So let's just, so I'm probably locked down from doing this on this computer, but if you try this at home, you could change your time and click the button, and it'll give you the current time. It's reading it off the operating system on your computer, not on the operating system on the server. So you probably don't ever want to use date like that for things like transactions, right? Like a bank wouldn't use that, or Facebook wouldn't use everybody's timestamp for their updates from their computer because they could set that themselves. Does that make sense? So for most or Bank of America would probably not want to date stamp your online transaction by using JavaScript, because that's going to look at your local system, which you have control over, they don't. Does that make sense? There are times when you do want to use local time, but most transactional-based systems would not be a case for that. Okay? So a couple of things about this page, and also some contrast to what we've looked at in similar capabilities in PHP. Another important concept about JavaScript is that, like HTML, it loads as the page loads line by line. So, if we were to take this out, let's do that. I don't know if we can play around with this, but see now.
You got to submit it.
Okay, submit that code. So now it doesn't work anymore, right? But what I'm going to do now is just try to run this statement. So it's not in a function anymore, right? So this statement should now just run when I run this, when I load this page, right? Does it allow me to load the page without? No, see, it reloads the code. So I can't really test it. Yeah, I can't use this development environment to test what I'm trying to show you. But the point is, if you have this statement up here, and it's referring to an element that's below it, that statement won't be able to run, because at the time that it's interpreting this statement, that element doesn't yet exist. Does that make sense? Because the page loads line by line. So you see, in a lot of best practices, the first thing you'll see is a lot of people put JavaScript at the bottom of the page, right before the ending body tag, so that you're assured that everything is already loaded on the page by the time because most of the time you use JavaScript to deal with things that are on the page, elements that are on the page. That's what it's good at. But it won't see it if you put it in the head, because that thing hasn't loaded yet. In this case, it works. Why does it work? No? Why does it work? Very good. Right. It's not, you can define a function early on. It doesn't even care whether this element is met. It's just going to try to interpret this element when you call that function. And you can never call that function until that button's there. And that button can never be there until the paragraph's already there. So you're right. For event handler functions, you don't have to worry too much about is the page loaded already or not. But a lot of people, by default, will put scripts below all the page content. There are other JavaScript techniques for ensuring that all the page is loaded. The page is fully loaded. All the elements are on the page before your JavaScript runs. And I'm not going to go into those today, but we'll probably see those as we go through the semester. Because we could spend, there's a whole class, as you know, on JavaScript. And if you're interested in this, it's a pretty good class. Some of you guys have already taken this. So your first simple JavaScript program, right? It's on a page. It does something. Let's go back to the tutorial, see what we can learn next. So manipulating HTML elements. So let's try this ourselves. I like this. So okay, so what is this doing? This this web page has an H1, right? And it has a paragraph with an ID. And then it has a script. And this script basically assigns a new, what is this? A string, right? Just like in PHP, a set of characters is, we call it a string, special type of variable. So we're assigning a string to the element that resolves to whatever this returns, which is the paragraph with the ID of demo. Get element by ID returns one value, which is the first element with an ID attribute that matches that string, right? How many should there be on the page?
There's only one because it's an ID.
Because it's an ID, there should only be one. You, being the coder, can have more than one, but that would be a mistake. Some browsers would break. Your program might break, or it would probably, in this case, take the first one.
So in JavaScript, is there a get element by class?
Is there a get element by class? Let's think about that. Would you create an element, get element by class?
Depends on what you're doing with your HTML.
Right. Well, first of all, that's a no-brainer. Wouldn't that be really handy? Right? So yes, there is. However, thank you, Jim. Yeah. So there is and there isn't. there are many of these functions, but what's the difference between get element by ID and get element by class? Would you want to get element by class, or would you, as Jim says, would you want to get elements by class?
Oh, okay.
Right. So it's that returns something we haven't learned yet, which is an array, a variable that can hold more than one value, because there might be more than one element that matches that criteria, right? And we'll learn what arrays are in PHP, what they are in JavaScript, and how to deal with them. And we'll probably learn that in both classes. But yeah, very good. Yeah, classes can have more than one. IDs are unique. So there's get element by ID, and there's get elements by class. And if we go to the JavaScript documentation, let's see if it's, so it'll be in this DOM section, intro to the DOM. A document has, you know this because you've built web pages. What's the only child of the document? The root element, which is HTML. And then there's a head and a body. And then, you make up the rest, right? But there's a hierarchical structure. So what does JavaScript do? The page loads. JavaScript is a programming language that allows you to, that's designed to allow you to work with that page. So the first thing it does is it takes a copy of everything on that page and it puts it into memory, like one big variable, so you can manipulate it. And that one big variable is called the DOM, the document object model. And within that DOM, there are children. If you've got an H1 in there, you could do document.html.body.h1. Or it's more direct to say, to give it an ID and find it that way. Or if you're looking for multiples, you can give it classes. But the point is, what JavaScript does on the page when it loads is create this document, which is a complex variable that represents everything that's on that page that was put there by the HTML that you wrote. And then you create JavaScript to change the HTML you wrote in reaction to things that the user might do, like click on a button. Right? Make sense? So, here we go. So finding elements by ID, finding elements by, maybe it's in the next lesson. You can write, you could use, we won't get that far into it, but you can write data directly out. What I'm trying to see is if they have, here, let's do this. So here, just typing this into Google, there's get elements by tag name, right? So that's get all the anchors, get all the paragraphs, right? You could say get elements by tag name, and then literally just like that's going to get all the input elements from the forums, right? So you just type it right in there. Or you could do it by class name as well. I think it's get elements by class name. There's other DOM functions that you could use. These are common ones. So this is, like I said, this is sort of an exploration. We can't really cover everything in JavaScript, so we've got to cover what we need to know. What I'm doing now is just kind of giving you an introduction. But there's many, there's whole tutorials on how to work with the DOM in JavaScript. So, let's see, where's my tutorial? Statements. So a lot of this is just programming 101, things we already went over in this class about PHP. A program is composed of statements. Statements can have comments, either as part of that line or a whole comment line. And they're very similar, I think, to PHP. This will comment out this whole line. This will comment out multi-lines. Right? The concept of variables we talked about in PHP, very similar. JavaScript might have different variables, but in general, it's like PHP in that variables are not strongly typed. So unlike C++ or Java, where you have to say this variable is a number or a string, in JavaScript, just like PHP, a variable is based on what its value is. Right? So variables, where are we? Data types, we talked about objects. Let's talk about objects, not right now. We'll talk about it in the future. Functions we talked about. Operators, we looked at the assignment operator. Some of the operators are different, but almost all of the operators are the same. What does that mean? I bet you there's an operator in JavaScript for every operator in PHP, but some of the syntax might be slightly different. So you have to be a little careful, because remember, there are two different languages. So not equal, let's see the not equal. Comparison operators. So not equal in JavaScript is a exclamation equal. I think in PHP it might be a vertical line equal, but don't quote me on that. But that's why I always look these things up, even though I'm teaching this. So, but the point is, they're the same language. They're different languages that share a lot of commonality. And the confusing thing for some of you, well, for all of us, is that often they're on the same page. And in many ways, you're using them at the same time. But there are slight syntactical differences to keep in mind. Okay. That is good. So that's good. Conditions, we talked about that. If, the if statements, and then the condition being set by comparative operators, greater than, equal to being different than assignment. Remember that? The equality operator is equal, right? So let's see if there's other cool things that are JavaScript specific. Let's look at this. So okay. So this is a page that loads. There's no event that's driving the behavior. It doesn't look like there's no button or anything. The page just loads. So it's a document. There's two paragraphs. Hello world. Hello world. There's no styling. It doesn't appear on these documents. And then there's a paragraph below here, and then between them there's a script. So this script, what does it do? It goes to paragraph 2, so this element, and it changes 3 aspects of its style, right? So why would you do this instead of using CSS? You could do it based on some kind of event, exactly. So, well, there's no event driving this behavior, and it might strike you as, boy, this guy's an idiot. You could have done this a lot easier in CSS. The point is, it's just demonstrating a way you can use styling as an effect that is driven by an interaction. We already saw the event effect. Events are very important in JavaScript, but they're not everything. But once you start working with JavaScript, you'll see that almost all of it is event-driven. A lot of what happens is based on events. Those events that might not always be click a button. They might be something else. They might be time. Every second, fire an event.
Do you have to write it like this, or you write it in shorthand?
Do you have to write it like this, or do you write it in shorthand? So that's a great question. So now that we've learned JavaScript, I'll say this. I hardly ever use JavaScript anymore because I tend to use jQuery, which is a library that is written in JavaScript and is used often, usually, to simplify the syntax of JavaScript and make it a lot easier to do things like this. So there might be simpler ways to do this in JavaScript. Obviously, the first thing you could do is create a class and then just do add class function, and any attribute that's driven by any style attribute that's driven by that CSS class. Does that make sense? You could create a class in CSS, and instead of giving it each of these style rules, you could put them all in one style and add that style to the element. So that's a simple shorthand, and it doesn't take long for you to realize that classes are cool in CSS. They're even cooler in JavaScript because they give you a lot of power. You know, they do everything that they did in CSS. In other words, deal with multiple elements at once, but they do it dynamically. Right? So the add class function is very useful, or remove class, because it changes all those styles at once. So, for example, you're writing an application for B of A. You're putting somebody's bank statement up there. Middle of the month, paycheck sort of runs out. They go negative for 2 or 3 days. You add a class to their balance, which makes the font red. You probably wouldn't style that indirectly. You probably just create a class that works across the entire site that shows negative numbers in red or whatever. Right? So, but the point here is, it shows you the level of integration between the document object model and the world that you should already be familiar with. All right? You already know CSS. You already know HTML. This page uses HTML to put this element on the page, but once that element's on the page, it not only is rendered on the page, it's sitting in a place in the memory bank of the browser. And the place it's sitting is in a place called document, and then, dot something. It's a child of that document somewhere. We can get to it and find it by calling this function of the document object. Give me the element ID that you call P2. And I know there's only one because it's an ID, right? So that's how we refer to that element. Once I get to that element has an object unto itself, a style object, and a bunch of other stuff that we could go through, the value of it and all of this stuff. We already saw one. Right? What did we see before instead of style? In the last few examples, we saw its inner HTML element. And what does that represent? Everything between the tags, right? And we can either assign a value to that or get the value that's already in that by using that property. In this case, we have a property called style, and that in turn has other properties, and all the style properties are what was created by the CSS, either by our style sheet or by the default browser behavior. The default browser behavior in this case is black times Roman, right? what we're doing with JavaScript, this was black times Roman 2, right? If we blow this away, so I guess I could do it by going, yeah, see, if we blow that away, it looks like default, right? We could do this with with style sheet, like I said. And I blew it away. I didn't copy it. So, but the reason I'm showing you this is to show you the internals. You could see that by default is a variable called document, and by default you get arguments or methods that allow you to explore it. DOM exploration. I don't know what's on this page, but using this function I could explore it. Is there something with an ID of P2? And if there is, change the values of its properties in turn. And by doing so, by assigning new values to those, you're actually changing that memory bank of the browser and changing how the page is rendered. You're going to the wizard behind the curtain and tweaking it. You're not changing the HTML, right? You're changing the memory. You're not going here and saying, go to this line of this code and put a class in here, you know what I mean? Or put a style attribute in here. You're actually saying, after the page loads, go to its internal representation, which we call document, and tweak it. And by doing so, the browser will automatically update how it renders that element. It's very much magic. As magic as programming is. So, PHP not equal. Yeah. I don't think you could use that in JavaScript. Very good. Yep. Steve was in the JavaScript class. Concatenation is one of the. I think we looked at concatenation in PHP a couple of weeks ago. Maybe not. If not, don't worry about that word. Does anyone know what the word concatenation means? Combining specifically what? In programming. Yeah, combining strings. In programming, we typically refer to concatenation as string concatenation, adding one string to another. So if you have a string of the numeral 1, and you concatenate it with a string of the numeral 1, you get what? You get a string of numeral 1, 1, which looks like 11. But it isn't 11. It's just a string that we can then use to represent 11. But yeah, very good. If you take a number 1 and you add 1 to it, the number 1, you get, come on, I'll give you 5 minutes for this. 2, very good. So you see what I mean? So in JavaScript, it gets a little hairy because the plus sign is used for both. So you got to be careful what you're adding. You know what I mean? Sometimes, but we'll get into that. But the point now that you need to remember is they're very similar in that they're both programming languages that do the same thing with a lot of the same types of objects, but they each have their own world in which they live. And they each are run by very different things. One's run by the server, one's run by the client. So, yes, the whole way we denote objects, the syntax for denoting objects is different. As Jeremy says, in PHP, it's very different. It's kind of weird if you're used to what's called dot notation. What we're using here is dot notation. So we don't know what an object is yet, other than it is like a variable, but it is a complex variable. It's a variable that has almost like variables unto itself. It's like a hierarchical variable. So the document as a whole is a variable, but anything inside the document, and even here, like this is just a piece of the document, just one paragraph, that in turn is an object that has properties, a style, and that style property has in turn its own properties. So that's more than we need to talk about objects today. In fact, if that confused you, I apologize. You don't really need that. You can only learn so much in if you already know this stuff, that's great. But I want to be careful not to just make this a stream that you try to drink from a fire hose type of thing, which is not fun. So I think we've talked enough about JavaScript for now. Any questions? Remember, there's a lot more to it, and you can explore as much as you want on your own. We're going to explore a lot of it throughout this class. So if you kind of say, boy, that sounds really cool, I want to dive into it, in both of these classes you're going to get a chance to do that. But like I said, in both of these classes we're going to do it sort of opportunistically as we need the capabilities that it brings. And we'll start to do that in this very next hour when we start to build out a page. We'll look at some JavaScript capabilities. I started to talk about jQuery. jQuery is nothing more than a library that's not built into the browser, but it's very easy to add to your page, and it makes it a lot easier to work with JavaScript. And that's really all I'm going to say about it at this point. It is required for Bootstrap, so we already looked at it last week, and we're going to look at it again in a minute, or at least we're going to use it again in a minute. So it is very, very weird. It takes a while to get used to. So any questions about any of this stuff we talked about? So let's do this. Let me see if there's anything I wanted to talk about before we take a break. GitHub. So people hate it. People are shaking their heads. So I kind of said from the beginning, don't get frustrated, right? If you're able to use it, by the end of the semester, that's good. Don't let it get in the way of what you need to do. If you have problems submitting anything, you're not being penalized at this point, right? But if you do want to move forward and you need some help, let me know. I've tried to post I wouldn't say I've tried to post as much information as I can, because there's a lot of stuff on GitHub. I've tried not to inundate you, but it shouldn't be complex to the point that it is getting in the way of your work. Although I do recognize that different systems, different people's computers might have different challenges. So today I'm going to try to use it again to bring down a repository, do some work, push it back up. But if you're in this PHP class and you're a little bit confused, you might want to switch over to the HTML5 webpage where the discussion has a couple of tips that might help you. I don't want to make that a practice, because you shouldn't have to look at 2 pages. You're in this class, you shouldn't have to look at that page. But this is one area where if you're having trouble, it makes sense just to look over there, because that discussion is carried on more in that class than it has in this class. Oh.
Just to kind of clarify what the workflow looks like at GitHub.
Yeah.
We actually have we have 2 presences outside of our own system. One is the GitHub repository, and one is the student server, right? So we have, and then we have our local. So we're working on our thing here, and we have probably a repository on our own system also.
Yeah. So
that repository can be updated to the GitHub repository.
Yeah. So let me explain this. So a repository is a collection of files, and one of the things that GitHub does for you is allow you to clone repositories. So you could take a copy and put it or push it. Well, pull it or push it. So you could pull a copy down, you could push a copy back up, you could create a copy locally and push it initially, or you could create a copy on the server, then create a repository on the server and then clone it down. So to answer your question, your first question, Paul, is yes. A repository is a collection of files which is clonable, which means that there could be more than one copy of it, and GitHub allows you to sync those copies. So that's correct. And for the one simple workflow model or setup model would be that your repository, your local repository, is also your local working area. In other words, your local site in Dreamweaver, right? There's no reason why. In fact, I encourage you to make that the case, because it's going to probably make this class a lot easier for you, or at least working on this project.
What I'm doing now is on the Mac, you can do web share, and then you have the folder in your personal folder called sites, and that is actually a server site.
That's correct.
Which you need in order to be able to run PHP.
That's correct.
Just run PHP from any other folder machine. It has to be blessed as a.
Yeah. So that's correct. In Macs and probably in Windows too, there's built-in web servers and PHP servers. In Mac, there's Apache that's built in, and all you have to do is start up the web service and put your site in Sites, and it'll be visible on the internet. Well, as long as you make that public, yeah. So, or at least usable locally, right? Yeah. So that's a little different, though. That's still a server, you know, in the context of Dreamweaver. So, but the point is, on your client side, having those be the same thing physically is a good thing. And then if your server is remote or local, it doesn't really matter, you know. As long as you remember, you got to push it up there, so you know you can see it.
But we still have basically two copies of our code, so to speak, with GitHub, where we keep the code, and then there's the site where the stuff actually runs. It's not going to run on.
Yeah, so that's correct. In this class, you're always going to be syncing your repository, because that's how I'll get to see that's how you're submitting, essentially, your exercises. Does that make sense? So I can't see them on you're working with them on your local system, but to submit them, you sync them, you commit and sync. So let's talk a little bit about that. Syncing, or the concept of pulling or pushing, is syncing or your different repositories. Committing is a different verb. That's putting a set point in your repository. That's saying, at this point in time, I am saying that this is a state that I want to be in. Does that make sense? And that's something that the developer does. And it's independent of syncing. So you could be working on something and you could change line 3, 4, 5, commit. And then you could go change line 4, 5, 7, commit. And then you could say, well, that broke things, let's go back to that first commit and try this again. And you could do that 20 times, and then you could sync, or you could maybe never sync, you know. But ultimately, when you get things working in this class, it's a good idea to sync, so I could see it, right? So the two different processes. Committing is just putting a stake in the repository saying, at this point, the way these files exist right now, this is a state. I've gotten it to work this. Usually, you'll commit when you've got something either working or you're about to try something new, and you want to save that state before you try something new. It's like a fancy version of how people use Control-Z, you know, which is unnamed states, you know, and you don't remember, you know, do I go back 5 Control-Zs or 8 Control, you know, where was I? Right? This is like a Control-Z with a name, and you can give it as much of a name as you want in a description. You can say everything is working here, and then you move on. So one thing is version control, another one is the distributed concept of GitHub, and that's where cloning comes in. So they're two slightly related tangentially, but they're different things.
So the GitHub repository has what we clone from up there has all those different lesson folders.
Yeah, so all that
would be basically a copy of where are we going to be making like an entire copy of our?
Yeah, so all those lesson folders was my attempt to try to put some structure in this so everybody kind of looks like the same repository. I could have all said, you guys create a GitHub account and create a repository, and that's where I'm going to look at your work. But you might call it lesson 3, and some, you know, I would. It'll be like looking at your hard drive. I wouldn't be able to make sense of it. So I tried to put a template out there to help us make sense of it. This is my first semester doing it, and it might not be the most perfect template, but that's why I created it.
So each week we should be putting snapshot.
Exactly. So if you look at so here, let me show you this. If you log in, I'm going to log into my GitHub account. We're going to have to take a break because people are going to... And so I'm going to go to my account. Can you let me in? Okay, so here is this class's repository, right? And all it is a bunch of folders. This week, however, I kind of added, and I added this to both classes' repositories, right? The HTML5 class as well. Sort of just a quick README file on what we're going to do, and then the images that we're going to use in this example. So this is just so I could get them when I got here. Just an easy way of doing it, right? And a way for you to get them. So if you want to follow along, you can go to that repository on GitHub and just download this images.zip. You don't even have to be logged in, really. It might even allow you to search without logging in. But to answer your question, Paul, yeah, I mean, if we really want to get sophisticated, I could make you pull this back down so you get the instructions. But what I'll do is I'll just put this on our website. So anyway,
I think I'm getting more clear because I couldn't figure out what we were supposed to do with all this lessons 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Right. So all it is a template that I created. So this week we're working on lesson 4. So usually what I'll say is, and I'll say it in this class, we're gonna go through a tutorial. This is an exercise for this week, and put it in your lesson 4 folder. And last week, if you remember, I said put it in your lesson 3 folder, and that's on the. If you go over here, and you go over here. I thought I did. Maybe I forgot.
You just mentioned the...
Here's lesson 2 folder. Yeah, so, yeah, usually I'll say.
Jay, you're going to show us again how to clone it?
How to clone it. I'm going to try. I don't know if it'll work. Let's take a break first. But remember I was able to do it the first week. I couldn't get it to work the second week. I don't know if it's going to work.
I cloned it and I can't follow your information. I mean, I can see all the...
I did, but I forgot.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, so I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it again. You don't need to resync. So to answer your question, Jeremy, you don't need to resync with my lesson 4. You create your own lesson 4. All I've done is put some images in there, and the reason I put them in there is so I could get to them. And so you could get to them for right now if you need to. Literally all you have to do is find that repository and just right-click this and you can download it. So I will try to go through a GitHub poll when we come back from break. And why don't we take a 10-minute break and come back at 8:48. Okay? And Sergio's going to remind me to turn the recording back on when we get back. Jay, are we going to get responses to our assignment submissions? We are, yeah. So I'm going to get to that. So you won't get letter grades, but take your time. But you will get feedback, and I haven't taken my time, but you will. Okay, where was I? So I could have taken another approach, which is sort of here's all the files you need. Let's code them. But for this little tutorial, because it's based so much on existing code that we're getting from other sources, we're just going to go out and get it. So you know, a lot of people might feel, boy, these tutorials, you're jumping around and copying stuff, and you know, I'm really confused. I'll try to go a little slow, but and in the future I'll try to avoid that type. But essentially for this one, it is kind of a tutorial. How do you go out and get a bunch of things and put a page together from that, right? While learning how some of these things work as you go along with it. So that's just a preamble. Bear with me for this one. So before we get started, I'm just going to start up Dreamweaver. If I can find it here. Here we go. And this will take a minute to start. So essentially what we're going to do this time, I'm going to close some of these windows, is talk about all this stuff. Oop, could have kept that open. What we're going to do is go back to the Bootstrap page. And you don't have to exactly do this, like I said. You know, this is sort of just something I'm kind of going through the steps to show you some of the additional capabilities that we didn't get to last time. But what we'd like to do, what I'd like to do, is build sort of a one-page website that is highly compelling visually and highly responsive to different devices. And I wanted to play around with this carousel template that we peeked at last week. So I thought we'd just take this template and run with it from here and build a page based on that. And obviously these icons are gigantic. We want to replace those. But in general, we kind of have this gallery, which we looked at briefly last week. It's really easy to build. In this case, it's built into the page, right? This gallery is very similar to the one that I showed you before that we did in last year's JavaScript class. In other words, the Bootstrap carousel slideshow uses a combination of CSS3 capabilities, transition capabilities, as well as JavaScript to enable it. And all the code is there. You can look at any of these. It's all open source. You can see it. But we're going to build a page based loosely on this template. And to do so, the first thing we're going to do is just download what we downloaded last week, which is the basic core Bootstrap files. And the best way to get those is to go to Customize, the Customize page, go to the bottom, and download that file. Just click on Download. And that'll bring a file that's 377K zipped. Okay? And then I am going to go to my desktop. Here. And I'm going to take this and put it in my desktop. I go to my desktop and I am going to create a new folder. Just to have a folder, so I'm going to call it, oh, you know what, before I do this, let me do this. I'm going to, as I said before, I forgot, I'm going to try to get our repository up to GitHub because people wanted to see that. So let me do that. Almost forgot. So here is our class repository for this class. Right? And what I'm going to be doing is working here, but let me try to see if I could clone this. And I think when I click this, it's supposed to try to download the GitHub for Windows client. And all it did was add somebody to our session. All right. All right, I'm waiting. You saw it? That's it? Yeah, it downloaded the zip file.
Did you hit on the zip or clone in Windows?
I hit clone in Windows, and it gave me the zip.
Yeah, because I get that the other pop-up window, black window.
That's in your computer. Yeah. So my thoughts are this, is that somehow this computer is blocked from installing GitHub, the GitHub client for whatever reason by default. So it just gives me the zip file. So I don't think it's anything in GitHub. I think it's the way this computer or this network is set up that I'm unable to demonstrate it the way you would normally see it if you did. The behavior for clone in Windows is exactly like zip because this computer is not allowing GitHub to install itself. Does that make sense? So I tried to demonstrate it, but unfortunately I'm unable to. Maybe next week I'll bring in my personal computer and we could try it from there, just so we could demonstrate it once more in this class. Does that make sense? So, but regardless, I do have the repository here, although it doesn't make a lot of sense to use it because I have no way of getting it back up. Does that make sense? You could pull a repository just by downloading the zip, but there's no way you could push it back unless you have either a client or the command line capability to do so. And I don't even think I'm able to install that on this computer. So it's a computer thing, not a GitHub thing at this point. But anyway, what I really want after all that is just these images because I'm going to use those in my site. But I can get those in a minute. So let's do this. I am going to create a folder. On my desktop. I started it. It's called New Folder. So let me change the name of that to, I'm going to call this just February 13th. And I'm going to put Bootstrap in there. Are you allowed to do that? Yep. And then I am going to go in here and extract the Bootstrap folder. Okay, so at this point, I could get rid of this zip file, and I have a folder that's my home. I called it February 13th, and then I have a folder called Bootstrap, and that has a JavaScript folder, it has a CSS folder, and it has an image folder. And this is everything you need for all the capabilities of Bootstrap. Well, I'm not going to do it from here anyway. Well, that's up to you. So that's a good question. It would be simple for every lesson if you downloaded Bootstrap and made that part of the lesson. But you're going to have a lot of copies of Bootstrap if you do that and continue to use it. So I'm working in a different environment than you in that I'm a nomad. I use this computer and it goes away. But in your own world, if you already have Bootstrap and you did this last week, you don't really need to do this. If you're working on your computer, you could use that library and just link to it across folders. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So one of the things we don't cover in this class is site organization, and I guess I assume that it's been covered by previous classes, but that might not be a good assumption. And it's probably a good idea to recover it once in a while anyway. So maybe we'll talk about that. But yeah, this is bad site organization. If you have a Bootstrap folder in every, in this class it doesn't really matter other than you're taking up space on the student server. But if you have a client's website and every time they ask you to build a slideshow, you download Bootstrap, that's not the right way to build a website. Does that make sense? It could be a shared library. It does the same thing on every page, right? So, but at this point, I've got the Bootstrap files, and I could essentially create a new web page. What I'm going to do, though, remember, I want to kind of take that template that came from Bootstrap, that what they call the carousel template, which is, if you go back to Get Started and you go to Examples, it'll take you to this page. You could literally just scrape the code off of this page. We're gonna have to work on it. We're gonna have to play around with it. But you can literally just get the code because it's a pretty good starting point. So what I'm going to do is, I think you could do view source. Does that work? Yep. So my right context button didn't have a view source, so I just typed in view source here, view hyphen source, and it seemed to work. So I'm literally going to swipe this template code. And it's going to take, you know, the content, the images, all of that stuff. We're gonna tweak a lot of it, but it's a good place to start. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to create a new HTML page. So there is no PHP on this page. For the PHP class, I said before, you know, it might not be a bad idea to name all your pages PHP. It doesn't really matter for this page. So if you go either way, I'm just going to call it an HTML page. And I am going to go, Dreamweaver is going to create some default code. In fact, it didn't even create an HTML5 because I didn't tell it to. The default, even in CS6, is XHTML. Isn't that interesting? So I am going to just replace all of that with all of that template stuff that I copied. The old copy and paste thing. So I've got a pretty big page. And what is all this? Did I not get all of the code? So I didn't get all of it. That's my fault. You probably... I'm sorry?
Command A.
Command A. I thought I got all of it. Copy. Command A, paste. There we go. So, and I've got a leading line there, so I'm going to blow that away. Okay? So, first thing I'm going to do, let's just change the title. So what I'm going to do is I got some pictures of gardening. So I'm going to create like a website for a gardener. So, Joe's Lawn Care and Maintenance. So that's just the page title. You don't get to see that, but it's a good idea to update that, right? This obviously has to change to Bootstrap, because from here I'm linking in, right? Under my folder is a Bootstrap folder, which has a CSS folder, which then has the Bootstrap CSS under that. Right? I don't believe I even need this responsive CSS. Because remember, I am using the more complete version of Bootstrap, which has the responsive piece built in. So I'm just going to blow that away for now. I don't need that style sheet. Now I've got a whole giant bunch of styles that do a lot of the layout of this page, right? What I'm going to do is take the whole style tag and take it out of this document and put it in a style sheet. It doesn't belong in the head, right? So you know already how to do this. You can just copy and paste it. Does anyone know another way of doing this in Dreamweaver? Want me to show you how to do this in Dreamweaver using the CSS style panels? So what we would do is create a new document, which is a CSS style sheet. And let's save it as, where am I? My documents. Desktop, February 13th. So I'm just going to save it right in my root instead of creating a new CSS folder, right? And I'm going to call it Joe. This is Joe the Gardener's website, right? Joe.css. Okay. Now I am going to save my HTML document as index. So it's my home page in this folder, right? Oop. Didn't like that. And just save that document as index.html, right? Now I could go to my CSS style panel. So now I have a style sheet that's empty, right? And an HTML document that has a style element within it, right? In the head tag, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to link the style sheet that I just created to this document. And since this is officially a Dreamweaver class, I'm going to show you how to do this completely in Dreamweaver. You take this little, you go to the CSS styles panel, you get rid of this business, never use that business catalyst thing. You take this CSS styles panel and you click on the chain for link, and you find your style sheet. I called it Joe, and I've created now, usually at the bottom of my head element, which the style sheet is not in my head, but or maybe it is. Where's that style sheet? Here it is, right here. So it created this tag essentially. See that? So this links that style sheet in there. It's still an empty style sheet. These things I'm going to get rid of. Favicon, and you know those Apple Touch annoying things when it says put this, save this on iPod. Anyone have an iPhone and you see those web app pop-ups? That's what these are. Blow them away. They're kind of annoying. So now I have, if I refresh this, I have a style sheet. And I have these styles in my document, right? So if I go here, you could see my style sheet, my styles that are in my document in the style tag, and then you could see my style sheet here, right? So here's what I'm going to do. This is how easy it is. You could literally select all these styles and hold down the Shift key to select them all and drag them here. And it should take all of that code. It's fine. So these rules are overriding each other. You know why? Because they are. You know what? So here's a problem with Dreamweaver. It's kind of smart, but because there are media queries in that, it thinks that the same rule is being applied twice, even though I think the reason is because it's being applied in a media query. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Joe CSS is already populated. Well, yeah, because I dragged everything in there. So look at this. It's not smart enough to move the media queries. So that whole thing I just did was not only worthless, it screwed us up. And it wasn't worthless. It taught us that Dreamweaver has some interesting features to make it visually possible to move styles around like that, but they're not smart enough to deal with all situations, including the most important situation we have here, which are that we have media queries embedded in our style sheet, and it's smart enough to move the styles but not the media queries, which totally messed up our site.
Can you undo?
Good question. Can I just undo all of that? Undo, edit. I don't think so. Undo it again? I don't think so. Maybe. No. Okay, so this is, Yeah, it did do it. It put it in the media query. Very good. Okay, so it did do it. So, but does everyone understand that concept? That I tried to show you a cool feature in Dreamweaver, and you could use it, but it's dangerous now because, remember, you should be using media queries if you want to build responsive sites, and Dreamweaver 6 isn't even smart enough to carry them over using that technique that we've learned in Dreamweaver. So I would say it's not a worthless lesson. We learned something here, which is what not to do. Okay? So what do I want to do now? Let's just do it the old-fashioned way. Take the whole style element and get it out of this document, right? And then we want to put it in this document. And look at this, it's still in here. Because when I undid, the HTML document was open, so it undid that, but it didn't undo this side. So I'm going to paste this whole thing in here. And the only thing I have to remove here is what? The style tags. Because the CSS style sheet, it doesn't need the style tags, it assumes them. And I've moved the styles into a separate document, which makes our documents just a little bit cleaner. And then if I go to the source code, our excuse me, our head is now a lot easier to read. It doesn't have all those styles in it, right? So that style sheet now, you could call that carousel page, and you could take that style sheet and apply it to any Bootstrap-enabled page, and it'll lay out, you know, as long as your HTML looks similar, it'll lay out with those rules. And those rules, you know, do a fair amount of stuff. If you look at it, they, where did we copy it from here? You know, they do this overlay layout, they do the drop downs, you know, it does this whole structure of this slideshow. So those rules are useful if you want to rebuild this page. Now they're in a separate document. So let's continue to look at our document because there's a couple of things we've done. One is, remember, we're using a better version of Bootstrap than this template was based on. So let me explain that again. There's two ways you can use Bootstrap. You can have a base file and all the add-on files, like this crazy thing here, or you could just take that 377K zip file, and that has all of this in one file called Bootstrap CSS. I mean Bootstrap JS. So I am literally going to get rid of all this stuff. I don't need any of it except for one source, which is bootstrap/bootstrap.js. That file has all the code that all those other files had. It might have more than we need for this page, but and if this was a deployment site where page load speed was very important, I might have kept it like that. But we're here for simplicity's sake and to explore. So I don't think I need this thing. I'm not sure what it does. And I do need this code because this is what enables the carousel. Okay? So I should have all my code. Now, we did not get jQuery we don't have this folder. And we don't have jQuery. Remember I said jQuery is a library that is very useful and required by Bootstrap, but I don't think it's included in the Bootstrap that we loaded. Let's take a look. If we look at our, I can't figure out what they did to the panels in CS6, or maybe it's Windows. Why I can't open and close these panels. But anyway, that's what I just did. I'm double clicking and it's not doing anything. So what was I going to show you there? jQuery. So let's do this. What I usually do is I get jQuery usually from a hosted environment. So if you type in like jQuery hosted, hostd, let's do this. Let's type in jQuery. We could go to the jQuery page, and I think here it'll give you a place where you can quick access. So here we could literally just get it right off of here. Does that make sense? You need to load the library, but you don't need to have it on your server. You could point to somebody else's server that loads it. And there's advantages of doing that. This server might be smart. It's run on a content delivery network, so it might have multiple places and it's smart enough to cache it closer to where your client is. Number two, if your client has already seen a website that uses that same file, it's cached into their browser. So it's a good idea to use a cached version. And what we need to do here is just paste that address right in there. And I think we probably want to do just like that. And I think we probably might be able to see. Okay, so we don't have the images, obviously, but the layout seems to be working. And but we got a lot of errors, right? Most of these errors are about, you know, we can't find the images, really. So what I'm going to do now is get that zip file and put those images in there, because I don't want to use their images. But we do have the layout capability working. We have one other error here. Let's get the images in and see what happens from there. So I did download. Go to downloads. I did download this whole repository. I might as well open that up. And it's got 15 or whatever folders in here. I only need this thing, so I'm going to copy this. And then I'm going to go to my desktop and my working folder, and I am going to paste it there, and I am going to extract the images. Okay, so there's a lot of gardening type of images here. So close that, and they're in an images folder. I could get rid of the zip file, and I could go back to my page, and I could basically, I don't know how to get my files panel open for some crazy reason. So what I'm going to do is look in here and look at these image names, and they're Yardscape 1, 2, 3, and 4. You know, I didn't, sorry about this. I thought I had pre-cropped these images, but I didn't. I apologize. I wonder if I could open them in. Let's start up Photoshop. Sorry about this. You get a quick Photoshop cropping lesson, which I guess is appropriate for this class. Right? Anyone know how to crop in Photoshop? Has anyone not taken a Photoshop class here? You have, well, the Photoshop classes here are great, and they really are, you know, they're really important for web design. So, but I'm going to teach you 101 basics. How do you crop in Photoshop? And remember I was saying last week, these are the guys I tell you, memorize their names because this thing takes so long to load. Some of these guys have been working on this since Photoshop's 5. 5 billion. All right, so counted a problem. That's fine. So let me open. Desktop. So I'm going to open that one, and that one. That's pretty ugly, huh? So let's do this. Let's image rotate arbitrary. What do you think? Rotate it 75 degrees counterclockwise. Hey, that's pretty good, huh? And now I'm going to take my crop tool, which if you're a horseback rider, you know what that is. If you're a photographer. So, and I'm going to, these images for this giant header slideshow, 1,500 pixels by 550, right? So I get my crop tool there, and I get to sort of crop out just a, we don't want that guy's truck in there, do we? Yeah, I would set it to 72 by default. Yeah, I don't see where the setting is though. Yeah, so I guess it doesn't matter. So, so now I've got a cropped image that is the right size for the slideshow. And as you saw, I kind of rotated it. This one needed rotating. So I am going to save for web. And I'm going to save it as a JPEG because that gives us the best compression. And I don't know why it changed my size because I cropped it, right? So let's do 1,500. And you can see it kept the same dimensions, which is good. So I am going to hit save, and it should ask me what I want to name it, and I could just override that name, right? Because I don't really care about that image. And I'll replace it. Right? I could get rid of this. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I don't want to save that. I want to do the same thing for this image. It already put the crop tool on there. See that? That's kind of cool. So, oops, and I took it off. Let's take that crop tool. Cancel. Here. Okay. So now I save for web. You can see it's gigantic, but that's fine. And I want to replace that one. Okay. Don't save that. And let's see. Oop.
What's the actual size of the image you're saving?
1,500 by 550. Oh, they're probably pretty big. They're probably bigger than you want. They're probably about 150, I would say. What did, yeah, what did I just do? Where's my image? Where's my history pen? Here. Where is it? Oh, here. Yeah, but where is the... All right, here's my... Where is it?
The window. The menu.
All the way up. Yeah, I got the window. Oh, here. Yeah, but where is it? Yeah. All right. It wants me to respond to something, but it's not telling... Ah, here. Okay. I'm going to reopen this image. Sorry about this. So, here. File. Open. We're working on this one. We crop it. I double click to crop it. I do file save for web. I do, see, it's supposed to save it at that crop size. I don't know why it's not doing it. And I'm going to save it with the same name and replace it. I could get rid of this and not save it. I just want to open up that one last, this one, because I didn't, what does that mean? I just saved this. Oh, there it is. And if we go save for web, I need to change the dimension. And it's going to replace that one. Okay. So that's 3 images. Was there a 4th? I think there's one more. Yardscape. Oh, that one is probably cropped already, so that's good. All right, so I apologize for that. I had spent all that time cropping them, but I put them in another folder, obviously. So we're done with Photoshop. We now have our images, Yardscape 1, 2, 3, and 4. If we go back to our carousel, what we need to do is replace each of these with images / what is it, Yardscape 1. And then let's copy that here. Here. And change this to 3, and let's change this to 4. And we won't use 2. Okay? And if we save this and reload it, we still get these errors. We'll fix that. We don't have those. But you can see our slideshow has our images. But the slideshow does not work. Object has no method carousel. So what does that mean? We have to look into why that's happening.
I think that's because you don't have
jQuery?
jQuery.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, so what this means, if you go, the only JavaScript we're running here on this page is here at the bottom. And this JavaScript requires this special character here. This $sign is an alias for jQuery. So as Paul says, it might not be able to find jQuery where we're telling it to look, or it might be their own version. So just to be careful, let's download jQuery. That really downloaded it, huh? Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to do a Control-A and copy it. I'm going to go to Dreamweaver. I'm going to create a new file. And it's going to be a JavaScript file. This is the quick and dirty way of making sure you have jQuery. I'm going to paste that entire code in here. I'm going to save this file as jQuery, and it'll put a .js because I created it as a JavaScript file, and I'll put that right in here. And I'm going to get rid of this file. I don't need it open anymore. And I could go in here and I could just say, all right, jQuery is right local. So you should be able to find it now. And now when I get rid of this, where's my page, and I load it, I still get an error, but it's not the same error. And my slideshow.
Your quote was after the jQuery JS.
My quote was after the. Thank you. Well, so that didn't solve my problem, Paul. Object has no method carousel. So let's yeah, that's this line right here. All right. So what that means, you know why that is? It's because this, I know why it is. Because we're not loading the, well, we are, aren't we? Here's Bootstrap.
There's a line of code that also asking for HTML5 shiv. JS.
Well, let me just take a look at so in Bootstrap, in JS, it is bootstrap.js, right? Bootstrap, JS. There we go. Right? So, do you see what I didn't really load the Bootstrap JavaScript file. So I save that, and I go back to the browser, and I reload it. And I get the error messages for the images that don't exist, but the slideshow seems to work. Right? And we can see the page. So I got all the JavaScript stuff working now pretty much. Right? So what have I done? All I've done is taken their template, put my own images in there, and simplified it based on a simpler version of Bootstrap at this point. That's all I've really done. Right? Now I want to play around with some cool stuff. And we have a little bit of time, so let's see how far we can get. So obviously, you know, I'm not going to play around a lot with the text that you can look at. You know, there's a lot of, you know, lorem ipsum and all that stuff. But there's a lot you could do with this, you know, given style. In other words, the template comes with layouts that are responsive. So when you look at it on a different device, your slideshow might not be perfect, but it does adapt. You see that? And your page elements adapt relatively perfectly. I mean, look at that. It's smart enough to take the float off when the float doesn't make sense anymore. That's one of the key features of those media queries, right? Remove the float rule when the page is so narrow that it doesn't make sense to have columns anymore, right? So, and all of this stuff is built into Bootstrap. So you saw how we built this page. The carousel was even part of the page. So let's, at this point, go take a look at this code. So the page loads. There's HTML on the page. And one of the HTML structures is this thing right here. So in Dreamweaver, you can use this tab here to select everything within a specific element. So all of this code right here is your carousel markup. And at the end of the day, this whole thing has an ID of my carousel. And then down here in the JavaScript area where we open up a script tag, remember this is, we've seen this earlier before in the tutorial. This might not look familiar, but this is jQuery. And what this jQuery is saying is, this is the operative line. Take the element on the page. First of all, let's take a look at this. Well, let's look at the whole thing. So, the basic structure of a jQuery statement, there are some exceptions to this, but the basic structure is like this. Start out with some indication that this is a jQuery statement. Does that make sense? And jQuery is implemented as a function in JavaScript. So what we're really doing is calling the jQuery function. Remember functions, you call them with parentheses. but we put an alias. So we don't have to type in jQuery a lot of times. We just, somewhere in the jQuery code, it aliases itself as $. So throughout your page, you can refer to it as $. So we run $sign function. The jQuery function takes an argument. The argument is a string that contains a selector. In this case, it's the ID of my carousel 1 or my carousel, right? But this argument, the string in here, should be very familiar to you because it is exactly syntactically identical to CSS. And therefore it works the same as CSS. The selectors you use in jQuery. So the jQuery argument is almost always used as a selector. What do you want me to do? Is over here, but before you say that, you say, who do you want me to do it to? So therefore, this part of this statement, so what we're saying is we want you to select this and do this to it. We want you to find an element that has an ID of my carousel and turn it into a carousel. So this little piece right here, this clause, that part of that statement, is syntactically identical to what in JavaScript? Document.getElementById, open paren, hash. You don't need the hash, right? You just need the string, my carousel, right? So in jQuery, it's simpler to write something like that because this is basically doing the same thing. Remember, let's go back. I think I closed a lot of these things, but if we go back to this says go to the document and run a function that returns the element that has an ID of that. Well, in jQuery, this part of it does exactly the same thing. And in the same line, you not only get the document, but you can do something with it. In this case, we're turning it into a carousel, which is a function that's a part of Bootstrap that takes that whole element and messes around with its DOM to make it into a carousel. It hides the non-current image. It shows the current image. It puts those buttons on there, and it makes the buttons change the images. It does all that just by running that carousel function, which takes the element that was selected and turns it into a carousel. So, what is all this around it? That is code that was written to ensure that this function runs after the page loads. In this case, it's kind of redundant because it's at the bottom of the page, but it also kind of, you remember this from the JavaScript class from last year, it sort of encapsulates it. So you can't see the variables that are in there once the program is running. All of that is beyond the scope of this, where we are. You don't have to, if you don't understand that, don't worry about it. But the operative, we could take all this out, in fact, I believe, and it should still run. There might be something in the carousel that is going to turn me into a liar here, but theoretically, I think this probably should still run. So I'm going to save this and reload it, and it still seems to run. Right? So all that code was just a wrapper to say, number one, don't run this until the page loads, and when you do, don't put it at the window level, put it below the window level so you can't see the namespace and you can't look at the verb. Again, you should know what that means, but the rest of the class shouldn't. And if you don't worry about it. So let's do something else more with jQuery, because that was already written onto the page. Let's create a new jQuery function. Well, let's do something maybe that's interactive that doesn't require jQuery. So one of the things that comes with the Bootstrap program we looked at it a little bit last week, is it's under JavaScript. It's called the modal element. And it's just a pop-up window. So what am I trying to do with this page as a whole? Let's take a step back. So fictitiously, a friend of mine comes to me and he says, you know, I got a truck, I got a lawnmower, I got a business, I get a little, you know, call from Craigslist now and then, but I need to get more business. My brother just joined the business and I need to get more business. Can you make me a website? So the purpose of this is like a one-pager, right? This guy doesn't need much more than this. He just needs a place where people can find him and give him a call, and hopefully where Google could find him. And if somebody types in garden in Santa Rosa, it'll pop up and he'll find some new business that way. So our purpose is not to create a gigantic website, it's just try to put as much on one page. And what we need to do in the contact, instead of taking the other page, I just want to have a pop-up that, you know, maybe shows this picture. Looks like an honest guy, picture of his truck, so then when he drives up, you know, the housewife there, no, that's the truck I saw on the web, you know, just to give the guy a little presence. You know what I mean? So maybe a picture of his brother too, since they're trying to go to all that type of stuff. So it doesn't need to be fancy. In fact, the fewer pages, the fewer moving parts, the better. You don't want this guy calling. He probably doesn't. You don't want to edit this thing all the time. It's not going to drive a lot of, you know. I mean, so we want to keep it simple, and we want to make it visually engaging. If somebody looks at this, they want to say, "This guy looks like a real guy." You know, you know. I don't know if he actually did this work. He might have pulled this out of House and Garden magazine. But this is actually, one of these is my garden. I think it's that other one. But anyway, it's just what I call a landing page, right? Really designed to do one or two things. Convince the person of something somewhat emotionally and get them to do something. If you put 30 pages on there, they'll never call the guy. They'll look at landscapes all the time. You want to get this and, you know, is this the guy I want? Does he do weeding? Yeah, call him, right? So a very simple landing page. You also want to make it visually engaging because, you know, as we've learned in, you know, thousands of years of advertising, if you make something look like it's put together somewhat nicely, it'll present a professional image, just like a garden. You know, it's a curb appeal. Websites have curb appeal too. So that's kind of the purpose of this page. The slider kind of helps that effect. This, what I would do is reduce these. You know, there's too many choices. What I'm going to do here is just put this about and turn it into a pop-up. So let's learn how to do that. What we're going to do is, let's go back to the Bootstrap site. And again, the best way to do this really is just to take their code. And this is the markup for this code. And you can just literally copy it. This markup is special. The code, because it has a hide class in here, you'll put it on your page, but it won't display until it's called programmatically. Does that make sense? In other words, because it has a class of hide, Bootstrap knows to hide it by default until we tell it not to. So we're literally going to take that and put it on our page. And we should probably keep it in the body, but maybe below the footer and inside the container. It doesn't really matter if it's inside the container, but I'm just going to put it in there. And where it says modal header, I'm going to say about us. And there's no save changes on this. And as you can see, it comes with a built-in button that knows how to dismiss itself, knows how to close itself. So all I really need to do is take this code and put it in here. And it'll, oops, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to copy it, not take it. Because I still need it in here. And to be honest, well, not to be honest, if you don't believe me, you could go back here. You don't even need JavaScript to make this pop-up work. These data toggle attributes are smart enough to tell Bootstrap that element that's being clicked on is meant to either to toggle that modal window, that modal virtual window. So by putting this directive in the menu option that I want to use to bring that up, that modal up, is all I really need to do. I don't need JavaScript. So let me show you what that means. The modal is here, and let's make sure I save the page. Page is saved. If I view it, the modal doesn't display on the page, right? Even though we know it's in the HTML of the page. If I click on here, it doesn't do anything yet. But I want to attach that modal to this menu choice, so I'm going to go back and find that in my nav element, which is right here, the about, and I could go paste that toggle there, and I think what I have to do is give it that ID, right? So I need to call it about. I mean, I could change that ID, but it's already there, right? So I'm going to go back to my modal, which is right here, and give it an ID equal to, and what was it, about? And I save that, and now when I look at that page and reload it, and I click on there, I get my about modal, right? If I click on here, it gets rid of it. If I click on here and even click on here, it gets rid of it, because I applied that data dismiss to that button. All right? So I didn't use any JavaScript. It doesn't require any JavaScript. I don't even think it requires that bootstrap.js. It's using attributes to drive behavior, right? Which is kind of slick, and all that's built into Bootstrap. So, and in here I would put, you know, me and my brother started this business, my grandfather started it 50 years ago, whatever it is. Credibility. And it's right up there. We don't need another page. You can put pictures in there. You can put whatever you want. Next week in this PHP class, we are going to make this a modal drop-down into a form, which is contact me, which is going to send an email to Joe. Right? So that we're going to do in PHP. We'll work on that next week. Okay? Just to give you a sense of where this is fitting in our class. I want to do one more thing. And it'll be magic if we get to this, but it'll be cool. And this is mainly for the HTML5 class. It's using the canvas tag that's near to HTML5. Okay? Does anyone ever use the canvas tag? Cool. So the canvas tag is actually pretty cool. What it does, like I said before, is it allows you to create a region on your page that can accept vector graphics, and can even animate vector graphics. And the canvas itself doesn't really do anything. It's just a tag. It's JavaScript that makes canvas work. And you use JavaScript to literally create vectors and manipulate those vectors. So 3 or 4 years ago, before we had the canvas tag in HTML5, before we had HTML5, how did we do this vector graphics and animation on the web? We used Adobe Flash for the most part. Right? So it was something that wasn't built into the web page or built into the HTML language. It was something that a company called Macromedia developed as an add-on to all that, a proprietary add-on that took the web by storm about 10 years ago and enabled animation to be on the web, but now is being replaced with the techniques the way it should be, which is your web browser should be able to do vectors and animate them. It's just a natural progression. Steve Jobs or the HTML5 committee or anybody, they didn't have anything against Adobe or against Flash. Flash was a solution that a proprietary company came up with as an opportunity for people that wanted to do things and were unable to do it with the technologies that were available in HTML at the time. And now that they're available in HTML, it doesn't make sense to use Flash. So that's a very important point. Why doesn't it make sense to use Flash? Because it's like bolting on another browser to your browser. You know what I mean? Or bolting on another JavaScript engine to your browser. It introduces a lot of overhead that you don't need anymore. So what we're learning in Canvas replaces what some of the things we would have done with Flash before. And again, most of it is done in JavaScript. So while you might not be 100% familiar with it right now, once you are familiar with JavaScript, you'll already know how to do web animations, right? So what I'm going to do in this demonstration, it's probably more of a demonstration than a tutorial, is show you a quick and easy way to find a way to create a canvas and create a pretty compelling feature on a website without knowing a lot about how Canvas or vectors or JavaScript work, okay? And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use a third-party library, JavaScript library, that's smarter than native JavaScript in dealing with Canvas. So what does that mean? Canvas is kind of a cool feature that's 100% built into HTML5 now, and that you no longer all right. I already logged in, didn't I? Sorry about that. I'm going to the class page to show you a little bit more information about it. I already logged into this. And I think I missed. Okay. This is high security on this computer. Okay, so Canvas. So, like I said, the Canvas tag is built into HTML5, and you use JavaScript to work with the elements that are inside of a Canvas tag. That said, the JavaScript is usually so complex that almost everybody uses a third-party Canvas library. And I'm going to use one that's called paper.js, which is right here. And the reason I went to our page here is just to show you, our HTML5 class Canvas page, is to show you how many libraries I found that enable Canvas without really looking too hard, right? So there's a lot of these out there, and I looked at a bunch of these, and I found something cool that I wanted in this paper library. And this is kind of the feature that I wanted. I wanted to create these waves, which I think is kind of cool, a dynamic wave thing, and maybe put that in the footer. This is the start of it. I'm going to play around with it a little bit and actually simplify it. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the paper.js file. That library is kind of like jQuery. I need to have it on my page to use paper. Does that make sense? To use the paper library. So to get it, I think I could get it on GitHub.
Jay, can you put the actual type on the tip of the wave and have it just...
You could. I can't do that right now, but you probably could do something like that. But let's get the source, and what I need probably is right here, this paper.js file. I'm just going to save that into my folder. Right there. And then I am going to go back to my document, and I am going to load that script just like I loaded this script. Right? So I can literally copy that line, and it's in the same folder, so all I need to do is paper, right? And that should find that script. Does that make sense? I downloaded it to my folder, and I'm just calling it in my, and that is just a library. I'm not going to mess around with that, right? What I am going to do is take their example, right? So let's go back to here. This example, I could get the source code of their example right here. And I'm going to take this. In other words, this isn't the paper.js code. This is the code that makes those waves. Does that make sense? It's the example of using paper.js that makes those waves. So I'm going to take this, and what would happen if I select all? It's not what I want. Sometimes it doesn't know what a window is. So I'm going to take this whole piece of code and copy it. And then what I'm going to do is save this file. I'm going to create a new file, which is going to be my own personal JavaScript file. I'm going to paste that in there. So now I could put waves on my page, theoretically, right? And I'm going to save this as waves.js, right? And in order for it to work on my page, I've got to load that script now, right? That's my own personal script. It's not my personal one. I copied it, as you saw, but that's the one I'm going to play around with. I don't want to play around with paper. That's the library. You know, that has all the functions. I don't want to play around with it. So I'm going to copy that, and what do I call that? Waves. And to get that to work, theoretically, all I have to do is create a canvas element on my page now, right? So I want that canvas element to be in my, do I want it in the footer? I think where I want it is outside of the container. I want it to go the full width of the page, just like the slideshow does, right? So I'm outside of the container. I'm going to create a canvas tag. That's all you have to do. Now, this document, this program, oh, you know what? I got to get rid of, what is this? It copied the whole page, right? Huh. Let me get rid of all this. I could copy that whole example page. Yeah, that's not what I wanted. All right. Let's go back and they should have like a copy of this code here. Copy that. There we go. Okay. So this is my paper.js, and if you look at paper.js, it okay, let's go over here and see how it's activated. Oops. View page source. So what I'm trying to figure out is that wave program has so it's looking for a canvas with an ID of canvas 1, but where does it activate it as a here we go. Okay, so this is what we need here. See this? I'm going to copy that. This is very operative. Let me copy it and show you what I mean. So the way paper works, this is my paper script, but when I put it in my source, in my HTML file, you see this script right here? It's not really a JavaScript program. It is a paper script program. So we need to paste these two attributes in here. One, what type of script is it? It's paper script. It's just something to get it to work. It's just something you need to be aware of. And two, it's smart enough that you could pass the canvas that you want it to operate on as an argument in the script itself. Does that make sense? So you're saying this script is going to operate on a canvas element, and this is the canvas element that I want it to operate on. So now all I have to do is give my canvas element that ID. Does that make sense? And if I do that on my page, which is right here, above it, I would say ID equal to, and close that. I think we might get this to work. So let's reload our page. Nothing working. We got some errors. So those first three errors are missing images, we know that. And uncaught reference, path is not defined. Waves. Okay. So what that means is that here's what that means. This needs to be taken out of here and put in here. Does that make sense? It's the wave script that is operating on the canvas. So those attributes need to be in there. And now when I load this, I don't get an error message anymore. And if I go to the footer of the page, nothing happens.
Space is needed in Dreamweaver.
I'm sorry?
Alpha, where's right there, script source, JS.
Yeah. Script source. You guys catch the same thing as home? Yep. Thank you. Needs a space. Reload this. Now, path is still not defined.
Maybe you need to copy that in the book.
I don't think you did. No, you shouldn't have to. Let's see. Why would paper not be defined? This is loading the paper script. This is turning. Where's on there? Maybe they both need to be paper script? I don't think so. You copied the waves code into. It's not the library. Oh, I really messed up. Thank you. So, let's go here and do a Control-Z. That won't work. So I've got to get another version of that paper. And to do that, I can go back here. I can go over here, and I could download it. Save it as paper. And replace it. Okay, now we're going to, that's fine. See, this is where I copied that whole, let me see. I know what I'm doing wrong. All right. I've got to go over here and copy this. I don't even know if this will completely work, but let's try it. Yeah. Yeah, but I don't want to do that. Oh yeah. Okay, now if I save this, I don't know if that's the whole paper library, but let's see. Include, yeah, you know, I don't think I've got the right, here, let's do this. Just to show you if this is going to work, I'm not going to give up. Let's go here and download the whole paper library. Download. It was updated today, right? February 13th. So let's get this. It's almost exactly the same size as Bootstrap. That's kind of weird. And then I'm going to go over here and go to Downloads and take this, and I'm going to extract it all. I only need one file in here, I think, after all this. Okay, and in here is this paper. I'm going to copy this, and I am going to put this on my website, which is February 13th, and I am going to paste it. And I do want to replace it. Copy and replace. And now I am going to download this, and it wants to go on the network and load this. I don't know why. Anyway, all right, we're past the class. I apologize. Click on paper and then download. Yeah, I tried to do that. So I don't think the problem is with the scripts anymore. I think the problem is something with the setup on the computer. Let me see if we can get it to work. Student.santarosa.edu. Just to show you what it's supposed to look like. I think I called it lesson 4. I did do this earlier today. Let's see if it works on this computer. Yep, there it is. So basically I took that wavy thing and installed it on our page. And I tweaked around a little bit. I changed the color, and I took the slider, the handlebars off. And see the question. Click on pin. Maybe it needs to be uploaded to. I think it does, because I think that Paper.js calls uses HTTP to call itself or something.
Right. So if you actually would have put the code in there to call it offline.
Yeah, I think if I upload this, I don't have a server definition set up in Dreamweaver, so I have to set that up to upload it. But I think if I upload it to a server, it should work. And here it's working the same code on another page that I created earlier today. So what I could show, what I could do, in fact, what I'll do is record a video, especially for the HTML5 class, to show you how I modified the example to get this slightly different ways feature. Make it look more like a footer. In other words, it doesn't have that, how the original, here, let's go back. Paper.js. The original version, it followed your mouse. I turned that off. And where it selected the points in the path, I turned that off. But essentially, you could see, we didn't look at the code very deep, but it has points, yeah. So, yeah, I put more points on, right?
That's
yeah.
right. It says that it needed to update.
Oh, maybe it'll work now. Here, let's go. Yeah, I don't know if that'll make it work.
No.
Yeah, I think it's something with. So I did modify this so it's not as interactive. But it was a cool feature that I liked, and I wanted to play with Canvas, and it's pretty simple to do. So even though it didn't look so simple to do. So sorry for going overboard. We'll see you guys next week. Have fun. Any questions online?
Did you want this back?
Yeah, and if you're in the class and you filled out that survey, I will submit it for you. Thank you very much. All right.
So are there any websites that are built strictly on just Canvas?
Yeah, there are. Here, let me pause the recording because. So I'm going to